Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Logical, Plausible, Probable. I'm your host, John Maddox, and tonight we're having another stream you just won't want to miss. If you got what it takes, click that link, or prepare yourself, for this arena is not for the weak. Now, let the mental combat begin, but always make sure your arguments are LPP. What's going on, everybody? How y'all doing? Welcome to a Logical, Plausible, Probable stream here on Sunday night. Going to be doing a review of an interesting conversation/debate I came across between Andrew Seidel and Tom Trento. That was happened this past February. It's kind of interesting, and the atheist is he's an attorney for the Freedom from Religion Foundation, written some books, and then Tom Trento, I believe he's a security expert, but he's also a very active apologist and the head of the United Way missions, I think it was. Let me check here. Don't mess that up. The United West, an evangelical Christian apologist. That's what he does. And it was a very interesting conversation they had back and forth, but it really kind of showcased to me, once again, the incredible level of superiority complex that new atheists seem to suffer from, along with their atheist fantasyland projection complex. And it was kind of amazing watching this debate, how the atheist Andrew Seidel was unable to contain himself. Like, and by this I mean contain himself, I mean from allowing the sarcasm, the derision, and the superiority complex to just seep through his delivery. And you can see it written all over his face. He just had absolutely no respect whatsoever for the positions being taken, which is ironic given the fact that many of the talking points that he was spewing were, I mean, they're well known to be without substance. And the methods in which he was, rejecting the arguments being put forth by Tom Trento, I mean, they were weak. I mean, they were just very weak. And I was kind of surprised. Like, okay, so we have a atheist activist who's writing books, who's literally an attorney for the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and this is all he's got. I was really expecting there to be more substance, but there was not. Before we get into all that, I want to say a big shout out to everybody that's in the stream this late night. We're getting kicked off. Doki Doki, as always, has arrived, and thank you so much, brother, for the super stickers you're already tossing. Honesty Angel is staying up late again, up in good old Canada. Good to see you. And I hope some more people will join us here shortly as we get going on all this. But like I said, I just wanted to kind of, let's just start reviewing some of these debates and actually start looking at the incredible level of just superficiality that is new atheism, and how there's just I don't understand how they take themselves so seriously and act like the positions they put forth and the arguments they make are just so amazing and overwhelmingly superior to what theists put forth, when it's just sad. But with all that said, without further ado, let's get into reviewing this debate. I want to do that before it. Actually, you know what? I'm going to start with another video that I'd come across. I think I'll kind of put in context the atheist position. So let me share this other video real quick, and then we'll get into the debate. So this is the coming out video of the atheist. Let's play that real quick, give you a little understanding where he's coming from, and then we'll get into the debate.
My name is Andrew Seidel. I'm an attorney for the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist because faith is not a virtue. A willingness to believe anything without evidence and to cling to that belief is humanity's greatest liability. I'm an atheist because religion perverts love, requiring us to love an imaginary tyrant more than our family, more than our children. I'm an atheist because our universe is far more amazing than the paltry miracles of the Bible. I'm an atheist for the same reason that you are an atheist about Allah and Osiris and Thor. I'm an atheist because vicarious redemption through human sacrifice cannot save my soul. Another person's death will not erase my wrongs. And I am an atheist because I take personal responsibility for my mistakes.
So obviously there's so many issues with the positions he has put forth. But hey, everybody's entitled to their positions, but it doesn't mean that the argument you're making to justify your position actually has any true substance. So, okay. Now let's get on with the debate and start this review here.
So the burden on this is on Tom. Tom must prove.
Oops, I skipped a little bit. Okay.
Atheism is monotheism is real.
Well, Mike, let me interrupt for a second. The topic of the debate that Andrew chose is the God of the Bible. Does the God of the Bible exist? Does the God of the Bible exist? So we have to have a topic in order to debate it. So
does the God of the Bible exist? Andrew will say no, and he will have 5 minutes right now.
So the burden on this is on Tom. Tom must prove that a biblical God exists. I'm not convinced. That is my position. Tom is certain. I reject his certainty. I reject his premise. I'm not offering my own. It's not up to me to disprove the existence of an omnipotent, omniscient, supernatural being that first appeared like maybe 3,000 years ago after 13.7 billion years of the universe existing. And then he did it in a tiny region that comprises less than 0.1% of the surface of the third planet from a random star, and that God's primary manifestations were a burning bush and a human sacrifice that he took a mulligan on. That God didn't appear to the most sophisticated civilizations on Earth, but in a mostly illiterate area so that those people could record his tales in a variety of 50 or 66 or 100 disparate books that are full of contradictions and errors, and for which we have few originals and hundreds of different modern translations. Tom has to prove that. And an extraordinary claim like that requires extraordinary evidence. But there's no evidence to suggest that a God exists. So I don't hold that belief. That's my position. That's the atheist position. This is skepticism, not cynicism. And it's the same skeptical inquiry you make with regard to unicorns or leprechauns or other gods. You don't believe because there is no reason to, and you're not afraid to say so. And remember, Tom has to prove not that a God exists, but that his specific God, which is only mentioned in this one book, exists. And so while I don't need to disprove the biblical God, by definition, his God actually can't exist. Square circles can't exist, nor can triangles that have 4 sides. And the biblical God, by definition, is impossible. God is all powerful, but he can't defeat chariots of iron. Judges 1. God doesn't lie. Numbers, Psalms, Hebrews. But God lies. 1 Kings, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. God loves everyone, John. But he hates people too. Psalms, Proverbs, Leviticus, Romans. Right? The God of the Bible is inherently contradictory, a square circle. It can't exist. Now, Tom may tap dance around these contradictions and try to square that circle, but once he admits that parts of the Bible aren't literally true, he's done. Because the only evidence for the God of the Bible is the Bible. And that's not evidence for God's existence any more than the Harry Potter books are for Voldemort's existence. The biblical God is a character from fiction. And from a fiction that was written at a time when humans didn't know very much. We didn't know about germs or cells, or that the Earth was a spinning ball orbiting a star 92 million miles away. Most people thought it was just fine to own another human being, as biblical law reflects. And that's an important point, right? It's a good thing that the God of the Bible doesn't exist. The God of the Bible is a tyrant, an authoritarian. He kills wantonly, commits genocide. In the 10 Commandments, he promises to punish innocent children to the 3rd and 4th generation. In the 10 Commandments, he permits slavery twice. This God actually spends a lot of time on the finer points of owning another human being. He tortures Job, a, quote, blameless and upright man, without any reason. Job 2:3. The God of the Bible, the character is not moral or good. And Jesus is a little better, right? Hell, eternal torture for a finite crime is cruel and unusual. And the sacrifice of Jesus, vicarious redemption through human sacrifice, is also immoral. The death of another person absolves you of nothing. You must take personal responsibility for your actions. We teach all our children this, and it's immoral to say otherwise. My position is that there's no evidence and no good reason or argument to justify belief in the biblical God. And everybody listening agrees with regard to every God except perhaps the one they were told to believe in as a child. And they hold that position after less investigation and reading an original text and philosophy. I've read the Bible many times. The road to atheism is littered with Bibles that have been read cover to cover. You're perfectly happy and willing to conclude that Thor and Vishnu and Voldemort don't exist. You even reject holy books and philosophical riddles as evidence that those gods exist. That position you hold is the same one I hold with regard to your God. So if you can understand why you don't believe in those gods and how silly it is to try to have to defend that lack of belief in the face of this evidentiary inadequacy, you begin to understand my position in this debate. So summon the courage to turn that same skepticism on the beliefs that you hold to, even if you've held them for a long time, because they are no different. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Tom, you have the floor.
Yeah, well, thank you, Andrew, for your opening and the.
Okay, so for anybody who has paid attention to any debates, conversations, analysis of, usual atheist talking points, you'll recognize that this guy, in a snarky, superior sounding tone, just spewed a bunch of very superficial talking points that has basically no real underlying philosophical substance nor theological knowledge and assertions, debunking of theological assertions, just like, oh, I don't like this, let's do some hand waving, do some random comparisons and spew some straw man arguments, and then I'm going to operate from the perspective, like most new atheist activists, that there is nothing of substance regarding the God of any kind, let alone the Christian God. Therefore, we can just ignore everything, and we don't actually need to have substance because some other guys told me that it's nothing to see here. And I skimmed through the Bible a few times. I've read a bunch of bullet points from different anti-theists like myself, and therefore there is nothing of substance, even though I am ignoring very, very basic concepts and arguments in relation to theism, both from a more religious angle or even just from a baseline philosophical perspective. It's truly amazing how it's like without fail. I keep hoping that there's going to be a better argument. I'm going to come across some atheist out there who is going to come out and just put up a phenomenal discussion, all sorts of new positions, and actually have some kind of, backing to their assertions. And yet there's not much. It's like they don't even take the time to truly create opening statements in their debates. It's just a bunch of flowery language with no substance. and then they accuse the theist of never actually putting forth any good arguments. Oh, you made no case, etc., etc., etc. When it's like, huh? You haven't addressed my points. As I think you'll see throughout this debate, as Tom Trent's about to make his initial positions.
The debates like this, ladies and gentlemen, are always, from my point of view, I've been doing it for a lot of years, always for the viewers and the listeners. You're always going to get, in my case, an atheist who well-rehearsed little psychological explanation of how they feel about things, which is fine. My objective in this 1 hour and 10 minutes together is to challenge Andrew's position and challenge my position as if we were in a court of law. So I want everybody out there listening or viewing to be part of the jury. I'm going to lay out some evidence to develop a circumstantial case. I cannot prove scientifically that God exists. Andrew cannot prove scientifically that matter existed eternally. So notwithstanding the ruminations of Andrew about the nature of God, he has the challenge of meeting the evidence as I present it. And one interesting point, looks like I already won the debate, because the debate title that Andrew picked, I gave him the chance to pick the title, "The God of the Bible Does Not Exist." He spent 3/4 of his opening telling me how evil the God of the Bible is, how bad Jesus is, and all the inconsistencies and errors in the Bible. So he's granted the proposition of the debate. If I stipulate that's the God, Andrew, that's in the Bible. Do I win the debate because I stipulate the nature of God that you have defined? I won't let you, I'll get you off the hook and let you engage in the information with me. And it's very simple, folks. We're seeking to determine that which is true. I'd like to hear Andrew's definition at some point of truth. Well, my view of truth is that which is in accord with reality. How do you determine truth? I'm going to give you a 3-part test that you have to evaluate everything we say in light of the test. And at the end of this exercise, you evaluate which individual made more sense answering the questions that both of us and everyone out in the audience has to answer. The basic approach is that when you make a statement, it can't have any internal contradiction. If I say today is Monday and it's also not Monday, that's not a true statement, obviously. Number 2, the information that's presented has to fit the facts. You have a fact, you present information, the theory, the hypothesis that best fits the facts gets better grades. The third test for truth is that there has to be some sort of existential viability, that what you propose and what you're evaluating makes sense emotionally, psychologically. You can't believe a system that's out of accord with that which is true and real. I maintain that we put the hypothesis up, and I got a little diagram for the hypothesis. Either God of the Bible exists or the God of the Bible does not exist. That's the 2 theories that we're arguing, and specifically, the God of the Bible exists. That's my burden to prove that. That's what we're looking at. I'll present initially the fact that God exists. There's only 2 options. He exists or he doesn't exist. Both of us have a problem, Andrew, of trying to determine where did God come from. I don't have the answer to where God came from. I don't know. Andrew has the problem of trying to determine where matter came from, because Andrew says there's nothing in this world other than the material world. I say reality is the material world and the immaterial. You'll see as I go through this, when I present the reasons why, it starts to make a lot of sense, and Andrew's atheistic position will quickly unravel. Number 2, when you look at the grand scheme of things, you have to recognize that if there isn't a God, then we have to ask the big questions. Where do we come from? Why are we here? What's right? What's wrong? And where are we going? I'm presenting right now that the issue of axiology, the issue of morals, we'll just start on that. If you have a God, 1 minute, you said?
No, less than that.
Oh, if you have a God, then from that God flows directives, love, grace, and truth. If there is no God, then the challenge for Andrew is to figure out what ethics are if there isn't a God. And the Bible, which we're debating, is full of teaching and direction on that which is true and right.
Andrew, you have a 2-minute rebuttal to what Thomas stated.
Now, I thought it was kind of interesting in that during the opening statement, it was like the atheist was unable to keep the smirk off of his face. It's like, you can tell he's just like, oh yes, I'm just going to dismiss everything that's being said out of hand. All of this has no substance, and I can just ignore all the points he's making. I don't actually need to be addressing these points from any real substance, because I'm about to spew some more talking points that doesn't really have, much backing. But hey, I can make whatever argument I want and claim that anybody who disagrees with me is just, ignoring science, or something, some usual talking point, or consensus is, or whatever the standard position that's going to be spewed by the atheists. And anyway, just pay attention, folks. Keep your eyes focused on the body language, the tone, and the snark that you will see oozing from this guy, as he doesn't really address any of the substantively address the points that are being made.
Yeah, I mean, I'm tempted to open my rebuttal with the immortal words of Vincent LaGuardia Gambini. Everything that guy just said is, but I'll try to do a little bit better. As a lawyer, burdens are important, right? It's actually important to understand what the burden is. You are trying to prove there is a God. I don't have to prove that there is not. It is an either or proposition, but I don't have to prove mine. I reject that there is a God. Now, you didn't, I noticed, really raise any evidence. You have to tell us why your religion is right and the others, which claim at the most basic level to hold the exact same truth about the universe on the exact same basis, faith, are not true. Why is your God true and the others not? Tom needs evidence, but right now, all he has given us is faith. And I mean, when pressed, Christianity admits that faith is the only real basis for belief. Christians are Christians because of their faith, not reason. And because he will assert his God so far without evidence, I can go ahead and dismiss it without evidence. Two things he did mention, gross materialism.
Man, there's a standing. I can dismiss really evidence. I can dismiss without evidence. I mean, it's the whole extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence. All those standard points. And what I find interesting about everything that requires faith. I agree that at some level faith is required to believe that God exists. However, the amount of faith, quote unquote, that's necessary does not have to be very much if you are actually using reason and rational thought to analyze the evidence and reach a both inductive, abductive, and deductive conclusion about whether or not it is more logical, plausible, and probable that God exists or that God does not exist. If it is not the rational conclusion that God exists, then it requires a massive amount of faith in order to come to the conclusion that a God exists, and they need even a greater level of faith to conclude that the Christian God exists. However, if the reciprocal is true, that it is both logical, plausible, and probable to conclude that a God exists, and the next level, based on the evidence, to conclude that the Christian God exists, then you are actually the one who is being rational. It is not faith-based, other than the premise of where did God come from? Not whether or not God exists, but whether or not, like, how to reach the conclusion that God came, like, how does God exist? That is something that requires faith. Whether or not it is the conclusion to the rational conclusion to reach that a God does exist in order for me to exist, that is not a purely faith-based conclusion, just like, as Trento made the allusion to, the differentiation is like, how does God exist versus how does matter and all that is material exist? And that is the ultimate root that is in question here. Although atheists love to try and circumvent all that and act like you don't need to even address that question in order to reject the premise that something other than space-time, matter, and energy exist from the material perspective.
I said nothing about that. I don't think that has any bearing on proving his case. There's a word for things that are outside the natural material world. It's called supernatural. And there's no evidence, none at all, that the supernatural exists. That's why it requires faith. To say that something is outside the material world is to admit there is no evidence for it in this world. It's to admit that one holds the belief on faith. So fine.
And that little statement right there about there's nothing outside the material world is either he is trying to do a dip, dive, duck, and dodge, as atheists like to do, or he is stunningly ignorant of the premise of things that are immaterial. So unless he's going to claim that semantic meaning is material, or mathematical concepts and abstracts that everybody recognizes are not material don't actually exist, or don't actually have the ability to be actualized into the real world, but they are immaterial in their underlying premise. Maybe this guy is not actually as substantive as he thinks, as he spews these standard talking points. Moreover, and this is something else that I think needs to be addressed, and I want to give this guy, well, credit, I guess. So he has a bachelor's in neuroscience and a law degree, or his website says several law degrees. It's like, okay, so theoretically you're an intelligent individual, and assuming you learned some stuff in college, but to claim that there's no like underlying possibilities of immaterial aspects and the hard problem of consciousness and other things are not being directly researched and not yet answered in relation to the field of neuroscience, it seems interesting that you would make such a strong assertion in your rebuttal here that doesn't actually have much substance from a, where things currently stand perspective.
I won't stop you. But faith is not evidence. As to me admitting the case, yes, if you will agree with me that the God of the Bible is a character in a book, I will happily take that as a win and move on. And I wish the rest of the world would too. It'd be a much better place. As to the final thing that you mentioned, talking about big questions that can't be answered, it's okay to say I don't know. And saying I don't know is not an invitation for you to slap your God label on it. And in fact, doing that has proven to hinder and hamper human progress. So I'm perfectly saying that I don't know. It's better than pretending to be certain and then preaching that ignorant certainty. I think that's far better. And you know what? I'll cede the last 10 seconds. There's no other evidence adduced.
All right, so real quick, want to address everybody in the chat. Shalom, Jamie, what's going on, man? Hope you're doing well. Hope those headaches were going away. Wootsat, what's up? How y'all doing? George Bond, hello, sir. How you doing from down under? We got Patrick Alexander. What's going on, man? That's a great question. What's this guy doing on his phone? So Patrick, the guy on the top left, I believe is the host of the radio show that they are doing the debate on. And I think something had happened to his microphone. I don't know. He's on the phone. And because at the very beginning of the video, he's like welcomes people to the show, and you're listening to I forget the name of it now, but the anyway, he's on the radio, and there's like another woman who's acting as a producer as well. And this you'll hear off and on throughout the debate. So this was like, I guess, the Zoom meeting between them. They're broadcasting onto the radio show, and this just happened to be on YouTube that I came across. Jamie, what's up, man? Thanks so much for your super sticker. Thank you, Doki Doki, as always, for yours as well. What's up, the XO of the RO? How you doing? Javier Ramos is in the house. What's up, man? Good to see you. And yep, we will continue on. I think this was interesting. I think it's, within the first, what are we in, like 12, 13 minutes of the debate, I think my initial point that I was making is already on full display.
Tom, 2 minutes. Rebuttal.
Sure. Andrew has the extremely difficult task of explaining how an individual can hold a position of atheism, which simply says that definitively there is no God. My position allows new information to be introduced. I'm a believer in God, but if new information is introduced, then if the evidence compels me, I'll move away from either a belief in God or a different belief in one of the other gods that Andrew has. Okay,
there was the snicker, the chuckle, the shaking of the head. What do you in the audience predict is going to be the response to atheism as the rejection of God? This guy's a new atheist. What do y'all think is going to be the response from this guy? We've already heard all this typical talking points. So just make predictions in side chat. What you think will be the response from this guy in relation to the actual definition of atheism?
Reference. I happen to believe in the God of the Bible. I'm not arguing specifically for Jesus, who's the Messiah in Christian view. I'm arguing for the Judeo-Christian God that exists. But my position allows for me to be persuaded by evidence. Andrew's position is an elitist, intellectually totalitarian position, which says, I know there is no God. And you see it. You can hear it in Andrew's attitude. I don't have to answer anything. I can sit here and just not agree to whatever you're talking about. Andrew's the one who's come down 100% saying there's no question whatsoever, there is no God, and there is no immaterial or supernatural world. Now, he's got an intellectual burden of showing how he can make such an egregious statement. That's one of his burdens. Let's move to the fact of the nature of God in the Bible. Andrew's referenced some very difficult passages within the Bible that make God seem to be an evil God. Hey, if the Bible is true as I believe it, you have to deal with that information. And we can go to the Jewish rabbis, particularly in the Hebrew Bible, who have explained this explicitly, the nature of God in a theocracy. When you start evaluating the evidence and putting it in place, I'm not going to have time to do all of that in 1 hour, but I always view these debates as stimulating true objective people to look at the evidence a bit further. When you start putting the pieces of the puzzle together, they make, not only do they coincide, they fit the facts, but they make more sense than a position that says, there's nothing out there, I'm going to roll my dice. I'll talk about rolling the dice in a little bit.
Andrew, you have 5 minutes to cross-examine Tom.
Sure. So, Tom, you spent a lot of time there mischaracterizing my position, which I don't appreciate. But I'll ask you, since you said that evidence would change your mind, what evidence would change your mind about the existence of God?
Well, the main thing necessary is to show that the historicity, one of the issues, the historicity of the scriptures, both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament documents, are not historically valid because the arguments for the existence of God of the Bible come from documents of antiquity, number one. You have to show the, we can go with the prophetic elements of the Bible, the various prophecies that have come true, predictive 1,000, 2,000 years apart. If we move into the New Testament, then to present evidence that Jesus Christ, my Messiah, did not rise from the grave would.
But you're assuming the
maybe
question.
Not bring me over on your side.
But you're assuming the question.
On your side.
You're assuming that those things are true. I mean, the historicity. You just said that because books are old, that makes them true. Which is, I mean, that's fundamentally
not what I said.
flawed.
Not what I said, Andrew.
Then please restate it. I mean,
Okay, so as you'll hear him expand here in just a moment, he's trying to claim circular reasoning from Trento by using the word historicity. He asked him what would convince him that the Bible actually is false, and therefore the God of the Bible is also false. Well, he's saying if it's proven that the scriptures are historic frauds from a historic perspective and aren't actually reporting historical events, then by default that would shift them over into mythology status, right? Like Homer's works or the other aspects of Greek mythology, all this kind of stuff. Like by default, if it's determined to not actually be writing about historic events, therefore it's not talking about anything real, then by default you would negate it as a foundation for your worldview. Like this is not that difficult to grasp, but apparently it went straight over this guy's head. And as you pay attention here, you'll see that he continues to double and triple down on this point while claiming that that's not what Trento was saying.
I haven't heard you state a single thing that would change your mind. You're saying if the prophecies were proven to be not true, that would change your mind. Was that one of the things you suggested?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go with square one. We only know about, we know through oral tradition, but primarily we know through written tradition. If the written documents, now that the historians, the textual critics say are books of antiquity, if all of a sudden science, and that's a science, that has nothing to do with supernatural belief. If science were to say, oh, those books, Tom, where you go in Jerusalem, in the Jerusalem Museum of the book of Isaiah, those documents really aren't real, I would start questioning things. That Jesus Christ,
but of course they are real, but that doesn't prove that what they say is accurate. Again, you're saying it's true because it's in the Bible, and I believe what the Bible says because it's true. And this is the worst kind of circularity, and you're tacking on this historicity to it. Let me ask you a different question. If you knew that the biblical God, that your God was talking to you, you know it, no doubt at all. If you knew that your God was commanding you to kill your child, would you?
If I knew that he was commanding me to kill, yes, absolutely.
Okay, well then I rest my case.
What are you resting?
I mean, if you are willing to commit murder in the name of your God, I think I'll go ahead and tack up a win right there.
I just want to say one thing before I switch to Tom's cross-examination. We're not opening if anyone's on the phones calling, please hang up and call back when I open the phones, because you're going to be on for a while.
Okay, so again, this guy and it's very ironic that this guy is an attorney. I really find it fascinating how so many attorneys just seem to be like, anyway, that's a whole nother side topic. Anyway, what I find extraordinarily fascinating about I rest my case on what? What does saying there's something about this God that you don't like have to do with debunking the existence thereof? That's like saying, I don't like so-and-so in a court of law, therefore they committed a crime, or therefore they did not commit a crime because I don't like them. Like, dude, you're an attorney? Seriously? And you're resting your case? No wonder you work for a anti-theist foundation rather than practicing law in in other contexts, because good night, man. That's a very interesting position to take in relation to resting a case when you're not even claiming to have a burden of proof to do in the first place. And I guess you're defending, but not defending the thing that you lack a belief in. I mean, come on, dude. This is pretty funny. It's amazing how this trend is so common in atheist debates on things like, does God exist? They're like, there's something about your God that I don't like, therefore he doesn't exist. It's truly amazing how they don't seem to grasp the superficial, juvenile aspect of their positions. It's really fascinating.
A long time, but I appreciate your call. Tom, please cross-examine Andrew for 5 minutes.
Well, before I start the cross, the little games Andrew is playing, you have to understand the.
Well, let's take this out of your
theology
time. Let's take this out of your time.
Oh, no, we'll do a little cross-examination. And our cross-examination, I wanted to lighten this up a little bit for the folks. So I have basically multiple choice. All I want is multiple choice answers. I don't want you to go on and on. This is my 5 minutes. Andrew, out of all the knowledge from the beginning of time until now, all the knowledge, you have mastered A, 100% of all available knowledge, B, 50% of all available knowledge, C, less than 0.000001% of all available knowledge. A, B, or C, Andrew?
I would absolutely say C. I think we know very little.
Okay,
and again,
and an atheist,
claiming that because
Andrew,
we don't know.
It's my time, Andrew.
Tom,
Andrew,
I'm answering your question. I get to say it. Tom, I'm sorry.
No, you don't.
I do.
Okay, so as you will hear for a little rant that's going to go on for about 30 seconds, you will recognize that either Andrew Seidel is a horrible attorney or he is recognizing that he has no substance and therefore is going to attempt to obfuscate throughout the cross-exam. Because if this is cross-examination, then obviously leading questions, yes, no, direct responses are the standard in a legal cross-examination period. So assuming this guy has passed the bar, which I assume he has, given the fact that he claims to be a practicing attorney for the Freedom from Religion Foundation, I'm not really understanding how he would have such a problem with undergoing cross-exam unless he is directly attempting to dodge questions and avoid actually being pinned down in relation to the superficiality of the positions that he's been putting forth. Let's continue.
You're asking me a question. I'm managing.
I'm managing.
The fact that we don't know things is not an invitation for you to slap your God onto it.
Mike, you got to run the clock. I'm managing my 5 minutes. You can manage it any way you want. Don't interrupt me, okay? Have the respect. Question number 2. An atheist is a person who, A, believes in God, does not believe in God, or C, is God. A, B, or C?
My position, as I stated at the outset,
A, B, or C. Don't filibuster, please.
My position, as I stated at the outset, is that there is not enough
violating
evidence.
The rules, Mike.
But you got to get answers.
I am answering his question. I don't have to stick to if he is not posing the answer in his multiple choice, I get to answer it as I see fit. It's not my fault that Tom doesn't understand the atheist position.
Andrew,
Tom,
we talked about this.
Tom, I'm sorry. You don't get to define my beliefs. You don't get to define my beliefs. I made this very clear at the beginning, right? The atheist position is that there's not enough belief. There's not enough evidence to hold a belief in God. So I don't. And it's the same position that you hold. You don't believe in other gods because there's no reason to, and you're not afraid to say so.
All right, Andrew, did we have?
And here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Here comes the lacktheism. You just don't have the right to define my beliefs. No, but we can talk about the words and the positions that you take, and then try to redefine what they actually mean. And it's this the superiority complex. I really wonder if so many, regardless of age, if a significant percentage of new atheists just never mature mentally, because it's so amazing how many of them talk and act like 12, 13, 14-year-old boys, and now that they're trapped in grown-up bodies, but still mentally act like they're immature children. I really wonder if there's somebody needs to do a study on that, because I really feel like it's the proof is in the pudding of these interactions, just so plain to observe.
Have an agreement before this that each of us can use their 5 minutes as they chose?
We had an agreement that we would be able to do cross-examination, Tom. And if you're not going to...
put in writing, Andrew,
if you are going to deliberately misrepresent my position in your possible answers, I am not going to answer it. I'm going to answer it as I see fit.
You have...
So he just said that they have in writing to do cross-exam. So is this guy rewriting what happens in cross-examination, who has the control and who can cut off and move on to a next question based on a response? I'm pretty sure that's the person who's conducting the cross-examination. I mean, again, what were you taught in law school, buddy?
Have all the time and the rest of the debate do whatever you want. You agreed in writing that I manage my time the way I want.
No,
you
Tom,
manage
that was
your time.
Tom. We agreed that I'll go ahead and publish the email after this. You talked about savaging your opponent with a sledgehammer or a scalpel. Don't tell me what we agreed to. I'm not going out of bounds here. I'm not going to do a multiple choice of your silly little test if it does not hold the correct answer.
What are you afraid of?
I'm trying to be truthful. I don't want to lie to the people who are listening.
You could correct it in the rebuttal.
We had our rebuttal.
Three, Andrew.
We had our rebuttal.
Question number 3, Andrew. You have a close. You have a lot of time to do it. Question number 3. An agnostic is a person who does not believe in God, does believe in God, or doesn't know if God exists.
So I'm also an agnostic. I also consider myself an agnostic. There's a difference between
You're an
knowledge
agnostic
and
an atheist. Okay.
Yes. There's a difference between knowledge and belief.
Okay, here we go. Excuse me. Atheists believe in a material reality.
Don't tell us what we believe and don't believe, Tom. Especially, I mean, you've done a good job misrepresenting it so far. A phenomenal job.
Andrew, you're interrupting me. Atheists believe in A, a material reality, B, an immaterial reality, or C, that Donald Trump is president.
Again, Tom, the atheists hold at most a conclusion that there is no God. That is not a statement about other things.
Okay. Now, question number 5. This question, Andrew, requires
Tom, your time has long.
Okay, so real quick, just to address atheists hold X. Let's just take advantage of the freaking awesome video that the guys over at Trinity Radio put together. And let's just quickly address the lacktheism talking points.
Atheism. Atheism is only the lack of belief in the existence of God or gods.
It is a lack of belief in God.
A lack of belief in God.
Someone who lacks a belief in gods.
So if you are an atheist, it's just simply lacking that belief.
A lack of a belief in a particular deity.
All it means is I lack belief in a deity.
An atheist is somebody who doesn't believe there's a God. I am not convinced there's a God. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm convinced there are no gods. Although that is a subset of, hey, I don't believe there's a God, and then there's a subset that is, I believe there are no God.
I've always very strongly advocated that atheism just means a lack of belief in God.
A lack of belief in God.
But studying at university, I found that this just kind of doesn't exist in the academy, right? Like in academic works, it's always used, the term, atheism, and it's always defined in all of the dictionaries, all of the philosophical dictionaries, as the belief that God does not exist.
The philosopher Alex Rosenberg wrote a book a few years ago called The Atheist's Guide to Reality. And at the beginning he says the following: most people think of atheism as one big negative. Atheists perpetuate the stereotype by devoting so much time and energy to broadcasting the evidence against God's existence. But there's much more to atheism than its knockdown arguments that there is a God, that there is no God. Freud said that. There is the whole rest of the worldview that comes along with atheism. It's a demanding, rigorous, breathtaking grip on reality, one that has been vindicated beyond reasonable doubt. It's called science.
Atheists, then, are people who believe that there are no gods.
Well, I think that kind of puts things into context, as usual, that the standard atheist talking points and the lack of substance that is rejected even by atheist academics and people who used to be, or still in some cases still currently are, advocates against religion or very, anti-theists, still maintain that position, but still recognize the superficiality and the lack of substance and the childlike immaturity of the positions that are taken by people who claim to not have a position and desperately do everything in their power to avoid any level of burden of proof. It's really amazing how, do these guys never take the time to look and see if the talking points that they're spewing actually have any substance whatsoever, or if they're just embarrassing themselves, to be honest. But okay, let's continue with the review.
Long expired.
I'm
sorry. No, Mike, he can't play games like that and not allow me to manage the time.
I'll tell you what.
No, guys, I'm sorry. Listen, we agreed. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Both of us have places to be. We agreed on how this would work. I will publish the email that you sent so that everybody can see what you thought cross-examination would be,
let's go to
whether or not this was fair,
let's go
and we can move on.
This is going in circles. I want to go to. It's my turn to go to Q&A. I'm going to start with Tom. Tom, you mentioned Bible prophecy, and I'm going to ask Andrew the same question, but I want to start with you. Tell me, in your opinion, what prophecies have come true? Start with one or two, or a couple of them. That's okay.
Yeah, again, taking a step back, and I always feel for the audience when atheists start playing games. The primary prophecies, there's 200 or 300. There's prophecies out of Daniel, out of Isaiah that apply obviously to the Messiah coming. There's prophecies about Israel regaining the homeland at some point, which was unheard of historically. That's one of the major prophecies that impacted my life years ago after studying the scriptures for a while and then seeing the prophecies. And many prophecies obviously around the birth of Jesus Christ, where he would be born in Bethlehem, the lineage he would come from, the descriptive death he would die. There's 200 to 300 within the Bible that when you do an analytical study of them, they fit to a point where a lot of the theologians and philosophers, even non-Christians, have concluded that for all of these prophecies to be exact as they are, the mathematical possibility of them not being true is infinitesimal. So when you start looking at data like that, chunks of data, it's persuasive.
Okay, Andrew, I'm going to ask you the same question. You've heard the Bible prophecy argument, regarding Israel, the Messiah, Tyre. How do you respond if somebody goes in detail about Bible prophecy, saying prophecy is proof?
I mean, again, it's the Bible trying to prove that the Bible is true, right? It's the same circularity that we just encountered, that Tom has evidenced throughout this debate. It's true because it's in the Bible, and I believe what the Bible says because it's true. I mean, again, this is the worst kind of circularity. He is asserting what he has to prove.
So, as you can see here, ladies and gentlemen, this guy clearly was not paying attention at the beginning of this when he first raised this standard atheist talking point, and clearly didn't either comprehend or is just outright rejecting or refusing to acknowledge the clarification and I mean, to be honest, dude, are you actually making this claim? Because that's not what I claimed. Response from Trento. And now, again, he's going to double, triple, quadruple down on this whole, you're saying the Bible proves the Bible, therefore the Bible is true. Well, take a look at that circular reasoning. I mean, it's like, so the point that's being made is if something was predicted prior to the action occurring, and nobody questions whether or not the historic date or the general date of the prophecy happening prior to the event in which the prophecy was designated. That's what is being talked about here. It's not saying that the Bible is not proving the Bible if there's additional external references that nobody argues whether or not this action did or did not occur. It's like, I don't understand how these people get up here and make these arguments with so much superiority complex on full display and don't even understand the underlying patheticness, like just how pathetic their positions are. It's really amazing. Let's continue.
To prove and claiming that it's true because of the assertion, right? All of that is just evidence, air quotes for you people on the radio, from the same book. And it's not hard to do that, by the way. I mean, we know that some of the New Testament was written and rewritten to make it seem as though Jesus was coming to fulfill some of those prophecies. I mean, we know that the virgin birth is based on a mistranslation. For instance, Jesus wasn't born of a virgin. And the Bible is full of holes and full of errors and full of internal contradictions. I mean, my favorite Bible story is the story of the woman caught in adultery. And it gives us that great line, right? That Jesus comes and he says, let he without sin among you cast the first stone, right? Awesome. Great line. Love it. What's he writing in the sand with his stick? Who knows? Really fascinating. Not in any of the original manuscripts. That was definitely, we know for a fact that was added later on. Probably because it's such a great story. I mean, so again, to cite that the Bible is evidence that the Bible is true is, again, the worst kind of circularity. And to call that analytical on top of it and that the probability suggests it's impossible is frankly, it's utter nonsense. And find me a mathematician. No.
Okay, I want to ask a question now that would...
Okay, so let's analyze what he just said. The redirect that was just executed by this guy. So the question at hand was in relation to prophecy. And what did he say? Oh, there was a story that may or may not have been added after the fact. Therefore, everything else is negated. Okay. I don't think anybody, at least nobody that I'm aware of, tries to make the claim that the story of that he just referred to is in any way, shape, form, or fashion something that was, the result of prophecy. So he is doing a very, very common atheist tactic, which is to deflect and redirect, which takes advantage of the fact that a gigantic percentage of atheists don't actually use their critical thinking skills. They don't actually analyze the arguments that are put forth by their supposed advocates, and therefore do not recognize that there was not an actual contradiction in relation to the question. It was just something that sounds good to the people who are desperately searching for ways to avoid the obvious and to dismiss any and all other arguments that have tremendous amounts of substance coming from the theist that negate the pathetic nature of the atheist arguments, and be like, see, we can just dismiss everything that this guy said because, as in this context, well, some people claim that this little story about the woman who committed adultery and but he who's without sin cast the first stone, that was added on. Therefore, we can dismiss everything else. That, ladies and gentlemen, is indicative of what is actually being pulled off and attempting to be pulled off by atheist talking point spewers like this guy. Let's continue.
Favor your side, Andrew, but I'm asking to Tom. Tom, there have been other stories like Jesus, like Horus, Horus, you've heard of that, and many other copycats people have talked about. It's not considered an original story. How do you argue to an atheist who says Jesus is a copycat of Horus and Greek mythology and many other characters like that? I'm calling Jesus a character, don't worry.
Okay, well, no problem. I wasn't aware that Andrew is a biblical scholar with advanced work in textual criticism, because in his very trite way, he dismisses the fundamental basis for examining all books of history, the science of textual criticism. So you have to start with the science of textual criticism to determine if the...
Real quick, Bread of Life is taking off. Good to see you, and hope you get some sleep. And yes, let's talk soon and get something set up. I'd love to have you on my show and go on your show as well and have some good conversation. Like I say, I apologize very much for not being in touch and getting all that set up. Have a good night, Rebecca. Good to see you as always. Come again soon. And folks, Rebecca is a freaking awesome supporter of the channel. Fantastic member. Thank you for that as well. And yeah, it's truly amazing how generous people become, and really helping me to get this thing going and have some extra time to be able to focus on doing streams like this one and being able to put a little bit more brain power towards the things that are happening in the world and on YouTube and just in general in terms of the macro level of existence and the ramifications of the arguments that are put forth both by people on our side as well as those on the other.
Iliad and Odyssey is real. If any book of antiquity is what it says it is, not what's written inside of it. So my argument about the Bible, which answers this question about the gods of Norse and all of that,
Okay, my internet faded out for a second. Okay, we're back. Now we'll continue. Now, I wasn't on mute. I lost my connection.
Circular reasoning is a little atheistic joke that all of them try to do. Once you establish the historicity of the scriptures, then you compare it to the historicity of any other theological system, whether it's a Norse system, an Islamic system, whatever it is, and you evaluate according to that three-part test I said, whether or not each proposition makes more sense than the other. And at the end of the day, the jury says, you know what? A more sufficient case was done by that individual on that side. And that's what we're doing here today.
And Jerome asked you the same question I asked Tom.
I mean, he didn't answer that question. He didn't even come close to answering
the same question I asked him. I don't know if you've heard of Horus or other,
yes,
other figures.
No.
Is Jesus
So I mean, being born of a virgin is very common in mythology. Being resurrected from the dead is very common. Hell, being resurrected from the dead is common in the Bible. And just real quick, I mean, I hope everybody can see the massive flaw in what Tom is saying. The Iliad and Odyssey are historical.
Yeah, let's address that whole being risen from the dead is very common in the Bible. Let's think about that. Old Testament, I'm thinking of, was it Elijah or Elisha that raised somebody from the dead? It was the kid, I think, that had died. Laid his mantle on him and he rose from the dead. Did the guy that dropped dead from touching the tabernacle? I don't think he got raised from the dead. I'm trying to remember how many others might be from in the Old Testament. There's not many. Then New Testament, you've got what? Lazarus. You've got the people who are supposed to have risen from the dead after, like at the same time as Christ, and walked around. You've got the so Peter raised somebody from the dead, I believe, and maybe one other. So, long story short, I would suggest that there are no more than a maximum of 10 references to somebody being risen from the dead throughout the entirety of Scripture, written over 1,000+ years. And yeah, I don't think that claiming that's some kind of a very common all over the Bible type of thing. I think that may be indicative of yet another example of atheists claiming to have studied Scripture, but not actually having that much knowledge. Because, yeah, Jamie, the saints in the end of Mark, that was what I was referring to in relation to same time that Christ raised from the dead, the those who walked around and such. But my point is that they're very isolated incidents where this is referred to. And it's not anywhere, it's in no way, shape, form, or fashion is it some common thing that this guy is claiming it is throughout the Scripture. So again, either he is regurgitating a talking point, hasn't actually done the research for himself, or he is purposely obfuscating the actual truth in a manner to achieve the objective that he has as an attorney and an advocate for the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Like, why would you actually present the arguments in a fully truthful way if your objective is to destroy them, if you think there is no reason for them to be treated as anything other than a myth? Like, you don't feel like you have any actual substance if you are just debunking a false claim that has no actual substance. Therefore, why would I even go and research for myself? And I think that we see that all the time here, at least on YouTube, with all of the debates regarding evolution, abiogenesis. Oh, the scientific consensus says that they've solved all this. When if you actually go and read it, they haven't. And yet the atheists will sit there and just spew it with extreme confidence that XYZ question is already solved, when it is not, and is recognized as not being solved by the quote unquote experts that are researching it. Let's continue.
In the sense that they are old and that we know those manuscripts exist and that they tell this story. But those facts do not mean that the Greek gods portrayed therein exist. I mean, this is just flawed logic and reasoning, just deeply flawed. Now, Mike, to actually answer your question, yeah, I mean, Jesus is a copycat to a large extent. I mean, those again are common themes throughout many different mythologies, and there's really not any evidence to suggest that Jesus existed outside the Bible. Maybe one or two mentions. This is not an area where I am an expert on the historicity of Jesus. I know several people who are. Probably Mike.
And here we go, ladies and gentlemen, yet another example of the atheist talking point that I knew it. I knew when I heard his original talking points, I was like, man, there's a very high probability that this guy is also a mythicist. And lo and behold, what do we have, ladies and gentlemen? Oh, well, there's a few references, but we don't even know if if Jesus was real. I mean, that's where we're at, folks. Again, yet another person. We don't really know if Jesus even existed. So let's just go back over to the lovely gentleman over at Trinity Radio, and let's address this talking point.
There is no scholar in any college or university in the Western world who doubts that Jesus existed.
And today I'm going to be presenting my argument for why Jesus probably didn't exist. So first, what exactly is mythicism? Mythicism is the hypothesis that Jesus did not exist in history.
Alright, YouTube, it's time to investigate some reasons why the figure called Jesus, the historical figure of Jesus, probably didn't actually exist.
A mythical man. Mythical man was the name of the speech. The description was, I think that there is at least one, and here's the problem, it's not just one historical guy. We know that on the mythical aspect, that the story of Jesus is based on, among other things, Dionysus, right, and Prometheus. I mean, shut up!
Do I believe Jesus existed? This is a tough question for me because I'll admit I haven't studied it that much, and I have a lot of atheist friends who are scholars, and they have studied this for a long time, and even atheists who study this subject are divided. They don't know, they all don't believe he was like resurrected, but they disagree on whether an actual Jesus existed or whether that was like a figment of some people's imagination, that they created him.
It's not a question that's debated among scholars.
Shut up!
Most scholars simply don't even think it's worth debating because of the overwhelming evidence.
Shut up!
And so I'll tell you what I think needs to happen. If people really want to keep pursuing the mythicist issue, I personally think it's a mistake to pursue the issue. I think that there might be better avenues to take for people interested in these things. But if you desperately want to pursue the mythicist issue, the only way it's ever going to be taken seriously in the academy is by people establishing their credentials in the academy. It is not, I know in the crowds you all run around with, it's commonly thought that Jesus did not exist. Let me tell you, once you get outside of your conclave, there's nobody who, this is not even an issue for scholars of antiquity. It is not an issue for scholars of antiquity. There is no scholar in any college or university in the Western world who teaches classics, ancient history, New Testament, early Christianity, any related field who doubts that Jesus existed.
Well, I just want to thank Braxton Hunter and Jonathan Pritchett for putting that together because, oh man, every time I watch it, I get a good chuckle out of it. And it's just amazing to me that these guys keep regurgitating this same talking point over and over and over again and think that the theists are the ones who are not having intellectual analysis, rational thought, critical thinking skill application. Like, we're the ones who are just being blinded by faith when they're running around being like, there's no reason to think that somebody named Jesus even existed. Like, or, well, we can probably dismiss that because that's some old fairy tale stuff like, Prometheus and Dionysus and such. So yeah, let's just go ahead and we can just, act like all this stuff never happened. Oh yeah. The calendar is defined by the birth of this individual, but no. He didn't even exist. Oh, it's amazing.
My stance is right now, depending on, if I decide to investigate this further, there's probably enough evidence to suggest that a guy named Jesus existed, though I think it's impossible and very unlikely that all the miracles and other nonsense, supernatural nonsense, the virgin birth, the resurrection that are attributed to him in the Bible happened. So again, all that is to say, there is very little evidence outside the Bible that suggests that Jesus existed. But I could change my mind on that question because I try to keep an open mind based on the evidence, though I am not afraid to reach a conclusion.
Okay, we're gonna have the fun part of the show and open the questions.
I'm not afraid to reach a conclusion. However, I demand that atheism actually means a lack of belief, not a rejection of. I'm also an agnostic, which is actually what I claim atheism actually means. That's what agnosticism would really mean. Interesting. However, you're an open-minded individual and totally ready to, keep your mind open and to analyze new information or to maybe reconsider your previous conclusions in order to reach a new conclusion. but you won't in relation to whether or not you totally reject the existence of God in order to convince yourself that you don't have to have any level of burden of proof from an affirmative no standpoint regarding the premise of theism. It's interesting. It's interesting how these guys claim to be the ones taking the high road intellectually and yet are not even on the road of intellectual discourse. It's just very juvenile. Very juvenile.
And to the audience, I'm going to give out the number, and there's people on YouTube. We have a caller already. I'll get to in a second, but it's 619-924-9749. You're on with Mike, Tom, and Andrew.
I cannot hear a caller.
Okay, right here they start having some tech issues. I'm going to jump ahead to the closing statements, which I believe are up here. Let's see.
Possible task. You had to show that there is a God, and that it was the God of.
Okay, I went a little too far. Let's see.
In your answer to the gentleman about the 12-step program, that you strive for things that are bigger than yourself, and there's more of a sense of urgency. That spoke to me as a Christian, that you're looking for something bigger than yourself. That's sort of an existential reach. And regarding the urgency, the issue of death. How do you understand death? What happens when you die? And what is this thing reaching for something bigger than you? What does that mean?
I mean, that's a good question. What I was getting at there was fighting for something that's bigger than you. And I don't necessarily mean bigger and grander in some sort of divine sense, but I fight to uphold the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution every day. I fight to ensure that state and church are separate in this country. And I do that for a number of reasons. I do that because there's no such thing as the freedom.
Hang on. He fights for the First Amendment. Like, do you separate just the freedom, the religious freedom, or the freedom of speech, or to assemble? Because I'm pretty sure that your organization has been going after people who pray, whether or not it's individually or collectively, if it's done on public property, which is ironic given the fact the United States Congress actually opens with prayer, and yet you've gotten football coaches fired for kneeling by themselves on a football field to pray for their players and for the young men that are getting ready to engage in physical combat. And yet you get those types of people fired from their jobs. But right now, as we speak, the United States Congress has a chaplain who performs a prayer at the start of legislative sessions. So I'm not really sure how you can claim to actually be fighting for something when you go after the weak and those who do not necessarily have swaths of attorneys to protect them, but you somehow are acquiescing to the powers that be in DC. Interesting.
Of religion without a government that is free from religion. So I'm out there defending your religious freedom to have these beliefs. And to me, being able to fight for something that is bigger than yourself is fulfilling. And we as humans get fulfillment in different places. That is one of the things that works and that I hold dear. I love my job. I love my work. I love to write about the work that I do. And those things are important to me. So that's what I mean about fighting for something bigger than yourself.
What about the question of the end of life?
Yeah, I mean, the end of life is the end of my existence. I mean, there's nothing. There's again no evidence to suggest that there's anything. And I know that a lot of people listening will probably find that scary or alarming. But I mean, it's no different than what it was like before you were born. I mean, that wasn't scary or alarming. Neither is this. I don't want to die. I really enjoy this life. I think it's fantastic. I would love to do more of it. But in eternity, I think I would be done with at some point. So I believe that the end of life does make everything not urgent in the sense that we have to do these things, but that there is a limited amount of time to do them in. And that makes.
If you picked up on his very brief aside there about, well, with eternity, I think at some point I'd be done with it. It's like, it really amazes me how obvious it is that most atheists don't actually contemplate the premise of what eternity would actually represent in terms of no longer being bound by time in the sense that we currently experience it, and therefore think, oh, I would be bored, I don't want to exist forever, all these kind of things. But the existence forever from the I would get bored perspective, where it seemed like it would last for too long, I want this to end, necessitates being bound by time and aging and all those other kind of things. So it's like, so if we now are immortal. We have the ability to comprehend things. We're not bound and limited to everything from a purely linear perspective. Like, you think that doesn't change the paradigm, and you want to just reject any and all premise that there is something beyond this finite, very restricted, limited stage of existence. Like, nope, let's just reject all that. And I'm going to try and make sure everybody who thinks that there's something more than this stage of existence is viewed as somebody who is blinded by faith, not actually thinking, not using critical thinking skills, not respecting science, yada, 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 insert talking point, versus somebody who is saying, I recognize all the things that you're talking about in relation to the science, the laws of nature, the material, all those different things. However, I think that there is something beyond this, and here is the logical reasons for why I think so. No, people like this want to just avoid any and all concept that negates their small-minded worldview and the juvenile perspective in which they approach the world.
I think, Andrew, I found in my experience dealing with many atheists,
I seriously doubt, Tom, based on your continued misdescription of atheists, that you have dealt with many atheists in your life.
Well,
I honestly am. Yeah, I tend to think you might be.
I'll lay out why you're not an atheist.
Overblowing that.
In my closing, I'll lay out why you're not an atheist.
Well, let me ask you a question, because you've asked me too. No, Tom, you've asked me too. So let me go ahead.
Go ahead. And I got one more regarding
a child dies of hunger on this planet every 10 seconds. More than 3 million kids die of hunger a year. And Jesus didn't have a problem magicking up some fish and bread in your book there. So is the God of your Bible, if he exists, is he good?
Yes.
You don't care to defend the 3 million kids a year dying of hunger, one kid every 10 seconds dying of hunger? You think that comports with a good God? You think admitting that you would kill another human being because you believe your God told you to, you think that's evidence of a good God?
Yeah, you asked me a specific question: is God good? I said yes. What's your follow up?
I did follow up.
So notice, as I pointed out earlier in this, that the debate is supposed to be about the existence of God. And the talking points that this guy keeps bringing up is, here's something I don't like about the world, or I don't like about your God, or how your God allows things to happen in this world. Therefore, there's no possibility that God exists. Like, that's not a logical flow there. That has nothing to do with negating the existence of a higher power just because you don't like something. That's like stating because your parents, when you were a juvenile, wouldn't let you do X, that therefore because you didn't like them, that they no longer were your parents, or that they didn't exist. Like, that's the flow of the thought process is being put forth by this guy. And we hear from ad nauseum from atheists. I don't like X, therefore God doesn't exist. Mommy wouldn't let me take the car out, therefore she's not my mom and she doesn't exist. Like, this drives me at the wall listening to this stuff.
I think everybody listening can draw their own conclusions from that.
Here's the problem, Andrew, and I'll explain. Yeah, but let me. He's not answering the right follow-up, but I'll explain it. If my position is true, and it's 50-50. You don't want to look at evidence. Pascal, a French philosopher, had a wager. There either is a God or there isn't a God. It's 50-50.
It's not, because you're omitting all the other thousands of gods that are supposedly in existence too, on the same basis.
If the Orthodox.
Again, he just said either there is a God or there is not a God. That is a true dichotomy. Everybody recognizes it's a true dichotomy, except for new atheists that say, oh, because other gods may exist, therefore God doesn't exist. Huh? If the question is either God exists or God does not exist, I mean, either Ford vehicles exist or Ford vehicles do not exist. And you're like, well, either all the other brands that have ever been made exist or Ford does not exist. Like, what the? I mean, these guys claim to be so intellectual and deep thinkers and highly respected and intellectuals. I'm just like, really? That's what you're kind of. Well, there's no proof Thor existed, therefore God doesn't exist. Like, what the? Oh man, so pathetic.
View of the Judeo-Christian understanding of life is true. 50-50. Here's the other end of it.
Talk about a big if.
Yeah. It's 50-50. It's either true or isn't true, Andrew. It's a very big. Your cute laughing isn't changing the fundamental fact.
No, you're defining all the other exact claims as yours out of existence for the purposes of making it 50-50, which is, I mean,
when you're debating one of those people, you could ask them about their particular position, but listen to mine. Have the decency to listen to mine. If I'm correct, then this is the first half of this game. There's a second half of this game. There's the immediate life on earth, and then notwithstanding, as Bertrand Russell said for you, you become a banquet for the worms. Notwithstanding that, there's a second half where the inconsistencies, the inadequacies, the horrors that actually exist today are righted in a majestic supernatural way. That's the completion of the story. I feel sad, actually, that you're not even allowed to consider the second ending, happy, joyful, wonderful half of the total game.
I've considered
but that's where all the justification comes in. Now, following up on that, why do you do anything if you're going to die and become a banquet for the worms, like Bertrand Russell says? Who gives a damn about your life? It means nothing if there isn't some eternal component to it.
I mean, that's you know what? I think I'll go ahead and address that in my closing, because I mean that's just
okay. Which we're going to do at this moment. Andrew, you have 2 minutes. You have 5 minutes closing statement.
So I mean, Tom, you had an impossible task. You had to show that there is a God, and that it was the God of the Bible. Not that morality exists, or that your murderous, bankrupt morality, you're willing to kill another human being because your God says so, that exists. Not that there are things that science doesn't know. Not that complicated things have a cause. Morality, scientific uncertainty, human ignorance, infinite regress, none of those things are evidence for a God, let alone Tom.
So you can hear the snark and the sarcasm in his tone, the blanket dismissal of everything is being put forth, while again he is regurgitating the emotional aspects of why he doesn't like the concept of God, not the actual underlying substance.
Tom's God. Tom had to offer some evidence for his God. And not only is there no evidence, there's no plausible reason to believe that God exists. And of all of the things that we can explain in this universe, and there are many, none of the explanations is God. None of the explanations is God. In other words, we don't need this idea. It does nothing for us. So you didn't come close to carrying the burden. So instead of hammering that more or getting lost in a philosophical riddle or the definition of atheism, which you continually misexplain, let me just say this to the people watching at home instead. Uncertainty that Tom was just talking about is scary. What's out there in the dark? What's under my bed? What's that moving in the tall grass? Uncertainty has always been scary for humans. And the words "I don't know" in response to that uncertainty can be just as scary for some. But pretending to know something and being assured in that pretense is not knowledge. That's ignorance married to arrogance, not truth. And worse, it actively impedes the search for truth, especially when the idea of the Christian God is wed to our public policy. Being human is an adventure. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's scary. Sometimes our fellows can be hateful and despicable and even violent. Often they're acting that way in the name of their God. Representative Jamie Raskin's son, Tommy, in response to malicious gossip would say, "Forgive me, but it's hard to be human." And that truth really burrowed into me. It is hard to be human, but it's also an adventure. To say that there is an end to my existence is to concentrate the sweetness of every moment we have. That which is rare is valuable. That which is eternal is banal. We are on this tiny outpost, this mote of dust in a sunbeam for a fleeting moment, for barely a blink. It's up to us to endow that time with meaning and purpose. It's up to you. To say there is no God, as I do, is not to say that there is no meaning. We give life meaning and purpose. You can try to do good, to practice empathy, to leave the world a better.
So he just said there is no God. I think by definition, that would be an affirmative no position that he claims he doesn't make, or doesn't take, sorry. Interesting. In your closing, obviously, clearly pre-written closing statement, you didn't contemplate that you are contradicting your own argued position in relation to not actually rejecting God. It's too good. Can't make this stuff up, folks.
Place. Facing reality, embracing reality isn't a necessary first step. It's a damn good place to start. And look, I get it. It is comforting sometimes to think that there's an all-powerful, all-knowing God and that this God has a plan for you. It's comforting to think that God loves us. He loves you. Except that you have to ignore that he does nothing to end suffering or childhood cancer or hunger or stop those one kid every 10 seconds dying from hunger on this planet. God's plan is comforting, but you're going to pray to change his mind when it's not. It's comforting, except that odds are you're in the wrong sect.
One of the things that really pisses me off about the blaming of God for starvation, random death, so on and so forth, is obviously there's more than 3 million, or a child every 10 seconds dying of starvation in relation to the number of children every 10 seconds that are being aborted. That number's not even in the same stratosphere. And to make that argument just showcases that you are morally and intellectually bankrupt if you're going to make those kinds of comparisons and then somehow use the death of children as a argument against God when you are advocating for the extermination of children before they're even born on one front. And then beyond that, the starvation of children. We as humans have the capacity to end hunger on this planet. We have more than enough land that is available for us to grow enough food to feed every person. In fact, there's enough food grown to feed every person, and yet somehow it never makes it. Why is that? Oh, wait. It is the result of human activity, human evil and corruption that prevents the feeding of every person on this planet. We, as the United States of America, for which this guy supposedly advocates for all of the First Amendment and all these other things, we give billions of dollars in both public and private capital to Africa, for example, and to pretty much every country on this planet that has hunger issues. We're giving copious amounts of capital to, more than enough in real cash to be able to feed the starving people of those societies. And yet, this has been happening for a century now. And yet, people are still starving. Why is it? How is it that the equivalent of, from an inflationary perspective and cost of labor perspective in Africa, we have given trillions of dollars over the last 40 years, and yet there is basically no agriculture. Water, people still walk 20 miles for water. The education is almost non-existent. Hospitals are mostly put up by private capital, not as a result of all the public capital that's given to all of these quote-unquote governments and then never makes it into the hands of the citizens of those nations and to stop the starvation and the death from disease that could be easily solved with modern technology. No, ladies and gentlemen, I am so tired of this just completely bankrupt argument from atheists when they blame God for this, when it is the free will has been granted to us, whether or not you want to say it's granted or exists, either way, humans have the capacity to end suffering, and yet we do not. So if you're going to blame God for the actions of man, then again, I go back to my original position, which is atheists are mental children who are pissed off that everything's not being able to, they're not going to do whatever the heck they want to do whenever they want to do it. Therefore, their parents are bad. Like, this is exactly what is going on. However, and this is the point I'm also making, is once you've grown up and now you're an adult, you can no longer blame your parents for all the things that you don't get to do now. You're now an adult. Well, guess what? The world is run by adults. And yet we still have problems that the people complain about when they're kids. Like, this is ridiculous and just showcases the pathetic nature that is the atheist position. Let's continue.
And going to hell for eternal torture. It's comforting to be certain about everything, except that you're not. Not really. You've got doubts and you ignore them as God ignores those children dying of hunger. Those doubts are the truth knocking on your brain saying, hey, why are we pretending to be sure about this thing for which we have no evidence and which doesn't really make sense? Just because other people told us to? Certainty is not truth. Comfort is not truth. Faith is not truth. It's scarier to think that the universe doesn't care what happens to you. It doesn't. But I do. And some of your fellow humans do too. We give life meaning. Do good, love blindly, practice empathy, forgive readily, create beauty, learn with abandon, challenge tradition and injustice everywhere. Above all, find something bigger than yourself to fight for. Make a difference in this world and in this life because they are the only ones that we get. But also think critically. If you are a believer in Tom's God, dare to doubt. Think about this God like you do every other God. Find the courage to question. I know I didn't answer all of your questions today. Go out and find the answers. Don't accept certainty as a substitute for truth. Don't look for answers from your church. Instead, try to find and understand the other side. Find the courage to question. If I'm wrong, it'll only make your faith stronger. But if I'm right, you can stop giving the dwindling, precious time that we have on this earth serving Tom's myth. Life is too good to waste on bad ideas. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Tom, you have 5 minutes. Closing statement.
Yeah, Andrew, maybe this Sunday I'll bring you to a church and put you at the pulpit. A wonderful sermonette that you delivered. Maybe you would even go for it because your poetic words about the good and the right and the just. Ladies and gentlemen, as I stated at the outset, this is to stimulate thinking for the audience. My experience engaging, debating with atheists, they hold to their position. It's usually a position because they had a bad experience with God. That's 90% of the, 10% of the population is atheistic. They had a bad experience with God. They're angry. And then from there, they move out and build a worldview and a system around it.
I love how he rolled his eyes and was like shaking his head. Just, that's not me. You're not describing me. Like, yeah, dude. You got something that's up your craw.
But every single time Andrew used the word the good, the right, the just, and the truth, he's speaking theistically. He's an atheist. The A negates theism. He can't use theistic terms. He's cheating intellectually because from a materialistic point of view, and you notice he didn't want to get into that discussion. If there's only material, where does the good come from? We have chaos and we have material and we have energy, and it becomes the good and the beautiful and the right and the truth. Where does truth come from in a thoroughgoing materialistic system with no outside element or agent describing that which is good? You want to talk about atheism being involved in government? Look at the atheistic governments through history that became totalitarian and destructive. Why? Because there was no moral code. There cannot be.
As I said at the outset of this, you just have to observe the body language of this guy. And here again, look at him shaking his, like he's denying the death caused by atheist societies. I mean, Stalin wasn't an atheist. I mean, oh wait, yes he was. Mao wasn't an atheist. Oh, yeah, yes he was. Pol Pot wasn't an atheist. Oh well, yes he was. I mean, they always try to dodge this. It's like, yeah. So all the things that you claim are the result of religion and all the deaths that happened and stuff. It's like, yeah. So the total number of deaths caused by religious wars is minuscule compared to the deaths just from World War I. That's before World War II, all the stuff, the Cold War, all the death inside of the USSR, inside of China. I mean, it's like it just goes on and on and on. And yet the attempted manipulation of the ignorance of the average individual when it comes to history and actual facts is the tactic used almost without exception by most of the atheists and their ongoing rejection of reality.
Any legitimate moral code within the confines of atheism. It's a fraud. They put one foot in the atheistic world and then they steal from the theism world for psychological comfort and justification. For all of you out there, why do I engage in these? I engage in these discussions. I feel sorry for people like Andrew. I pray for them. He seems like a very nice guy. He's very competent at what he does. One of the reasons I get involved is because there's a new movement going around, a new atheism. I call it atheistic nationalism. This is a system which is the foundation of Marxism. Atheistic nationalism is the foundation of Marxism, and it's mounted an attack against Jews and Christians in this world, particularly this country. Atheistic nationalism, and Andrew is a representative of atheistic nationalism, is the belief that the secular state must completely destroy any Jewish or Christian theology. You heard him say that or any public entity or any public institution. To these atheists like Andrew, and he doesn't know this yet, he'll come to understand it.
He's shaking his head, claiming he's not trying to erase religion from government and society, when he's literally an attorney for an organization called the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Folks, you can't make this up. It's like, this is what you do. This is your job. You write books on the topic, and you're going to claim that that's not you're sitting here like dismissing the assertion being made by Trento. You're acting like, no, that's not me. That's not me. when that's literally the mission of the foundation you work for. I mean, you cannot make this up. The level of denial of reality that is the atheist, the new atheist worldview. I mean, it's like, it fascinates me every time.
State is God. You see, atheistic nationalism is totalitarian. It's destructive to the moral order. It's destructive to human agency. It is completely antithetical to the founders and framers' view of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But here's what we have, and this is why I engage in these also. Joining with an atheistic nationalist like Andrew and his friends are hardcore Marxists, Islamic jihadists, big tech oligarchs. You're seeing it all over the place. and the Biden administration, we'll get a little political here, the ultimate objective of the nationalistic atheists or atheistic nationalists is simply to have an anti-constitutional canceling of the voices of Christians and Jews, particularly in the public square. I can't stand for that. All my life, I've been fighting for free expression in the public square. When I see individuals like Andrew, atheistic nationalists coming along, I go, no, we have to engage, we have to discuss it and put it all out there. So the bottom line, as Pascal said, at the end of all of this, it's 50-50. If you adopt the theistic view toward life and you were wrong, you lived a phenomenal life that was rooted in fundamental principles. If you were right, you have eternity with God. Conversely, if Andrew is right, we all go to annihilation, a banquet for the worms. If Andrew is wrong, then the concept of hell in the Bible is simply separation from God. Andrew, by his own volition, his own free will, has chosen to be separate from God. God, a loving God who gives us free agency, will grant Andrew his decision and say, you wanted to live with me alone during the time I gave you on earth. I'll respect that time for eternity. And Andrew stays in that room by himself forever. That's eternal damnation.
I want to thank both of you. I hope you both have enjoyed this half as much as I have. I'd like to ask you both to get your website out. Andrew, you first. How do people find you and get active in your organization?
Sure. First, Tom, thank you for taking the field. Thanks for that word salad at the end there. I don't have to go eat dinner now. Much appreciated. People can find the Freedom from Religion Foundation at ffrf.org. We are a membership-driven organization, 34,000 members. We work to educate the public about what it is to be a non-believer and to keep state and church separate. FFRF is on all social media. If you're interested in me, Andrew L. Seidel, I wrote a book called The Founding Myth: Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American, which seemed to be what Tom wanted to talk about at the end there. Maybe we'll have to do that again a different time. I'm also Andrew L. Seidel on all the social media if you're interested in finding me.
Thank you. Tom, just give your website out of how people can find you.
Yeah, they could find me at The United West. It's not theunitedwest.org, not a religious site or anything. I happen to be an evangelical Christian, but we work with wonderful Jewish people, atheists. We work with a lot of people because our goal is to fight Marxism, Islamic jihad, atheistic nationalists, to fight people attacking the U.S. Constitution. If Andrew was inviting me to engage on whether or not atheism or Christianity is better for the country, we can do that anytime you want, that's for sure.
I wrote a whole book
I
about
appreciate,
that as well,
Mike, you putting all of this together. And again, my goal was to stimulate thought in the audience, and we hope the three of us accomplished that today.
I think you both did a great job. Thank you so much.
So I don't know what everybody thought about that, but I thought it was a interesting discussion, and really put a lot of the usual atheist talking points on full display. And I thought they could have gotten into more substance back and forth, but it was obvious that the superficial approach to all of this that the atheist took was really going to prevent any kind of truly intellectual discourse to take place, other than denials and just lacking in substance of the true responses they were being put, or the questions that were being posed and the responses that were being made, the arguments put forth by Trento. So anyway, hope everybody enjoyed this and appreciate the support, the super stickers, and we'll say what's up to Kajaro, Truth Defenders. How y'all doing? Who else do we got over here? Some other folks that hopped in. Oh, SpongeBob Imagination. What's up? Good to see you. You made a great comment here. He says, when an atheist says there's no evidence for God, it's like a psychopath saying there's no evidence empathy exists. I would definitely agree with that for sure. Let's see, what did Patrick say here? The object of opening the mind, as of opening the mouth, is to shut it again on something solid. Otherwise, it's more akin to a sewer, taking in all things equally. Quote from G.K. Chesterton. Thanks so much for sharing that, Patrick, because that's a very, very apropos position. Salvation Zone says his mind is so open that it literally fell out on the ground. Yes, it's interesting. Let's all right. Well, I think I am going to wrap it up there. This is just kind of want to do a review of this, and I appreciate it. SpongeBob says good stream, LPP. I appreciate it very much. And Kajara makes a good point. Says they don't want you to think, to be educated, only indoctrinated. I agree with that 100%. I mean, the obvious attempt to keep people from actually doing real analysis when they understand the substance of the positions that are being taken and the evidence for and against the arguments, and have actually a baseline understanding of logic and just general critical thinking and baseline common sense. Good grief. if you can remove those things from the equation, then all you have to do is regurgitate your talking points over and over again with extreme levels of confidence, be sarcastic and dismissive, and issue derogatory statements towards the arguments and the positions taken by your opponent, and gamble that if you're able to pull it off for an extended period of time, the next generation will buy into whatever the talking points are, and therefore you will be able to manipulate the masses of a population towards your end. Even if you are the minority, if you're the loudest, very often you can accomplish your objective. And I think that's been proven beyond doubt throughout history, that there is, this is the methodology that's taken by those who want to ultimately control the masses. And very often, in spite of the supposed position of pure altruism and philanthropy, and we're doing this for the good of XYZ demographics, right? Most often those things are used consciously as manipulation tactics to take advantage of the naive and the kind-hearted and those who are too busy to pay attention to the obvious nature of the end objective of those groups. I mean, what does the end objective normally end up turning out to be? It ends up in totalitarian control and subjugation of any and all who reject the paradigm that has been inserted. This new paradigms have been inserted by those loud minority groups that somehow have been able to gain power. And I feel that we are heading towards all of this in a very accelerated manner in Western civilization. And it's a sad but true reality of our current state of affairs. But anyway, folks, I really appreciate you sticking it out through all of this. Hope you enjoyed the stream. Make sure to come back tomorrow, I believe. Still working on a time, but Tangelo and I believe, are going to do a short review of a episode or a segment of Talk Heathens that just happened. It's where a guy who is a doctor, an atheist who's a doctor and says he's working on his PhD in cancer research, was claiming that there is no such thing as information in biological systems, and was just making the DNA and biology is just chemical reactions argument. And to be honest, one of the reasons I want to review this is, if this is somebody who is doing research into cancer treatment, there is no wonder we have not yet solved the cancer problem. Because if you're not even going to approach it from there is a underlying corruption of the specified information which is necessary in order to have a balanced system that doesn't have errors in it, then we're never going to solve the problem. Because at the end of the day, cancer is either the corruption of a sequence specifically for a coding protein or an enzyme, or the regulation thereof. Like, that is what is cancer. If you're not going to approach it from that perspective, then you're never going to truly solve anything. But anyway, folks, appreciate you all very much. Have a great night. And as I always love to say at the end of these things, if you come to a conclusion regarding your very existence, I hope that the conclusion that you reach is ultimately one that is logical, plausible, and probable. Otherwise, you are not actually using your critical thinking skills. Have a good night, folks.